Remaking Europe, as the Prime Minister steps up his campaign to reform the EU ahead of the UK's referendum, we're in the European Parliament to debate some of the key issues.
And palace politics, what's behind claims Scotland would cut funding for the monarchy?
Good evening from Brussels, the capital of the European Union. Tomorrow, David Cameron will be in this city to set out his demands for reform of the EU ahead of the UK's in-out referendum. In a few moments, we'll be joined by a panel of MEPs. But first, Carol Erskine examines the impassioned debate about changing an organisation made up of 28 nation-states.
What I'm driven by is the British national interest, getting this right for Britain, getting this right for Europe.
Limiting the right to move for the European citizens, this is a non-starter.
The referendum may create the change in material circumstances which would open the door to another constitutional referendum in Scotland.
Europe is set to dominate David Cameron's second term as Prime Minister. Tomorrow he'll be here in Brussels, spelling out his demands to change Britain's relationship with the EU.
What I've been doing in the weeks running up to that is making sure that I speak with the Prime Ministers and Presidents around the European Council table to talk them through my plans for renegotiation, reform and referendum. And I'd say overall I'm getting a good response. This is going to take time. It's a complicated process. As I said before, there'll be ups and downs. There'll be days when it looks like it's going well, days when it looks like it's going badly. But that is in the nature of a complex renegotiation.
David Cameron appears to want change in 4 areas: barring unemployed EU migrants from claiming benefits and force those who are working to wait 4 years before claiming in-work benefits, and the UK an opt-out from one of the core principles of forging ever closer union between member states, give national parliaments the right to club together to block new legislative powers, and ensure that EU member states outside the Eurozone do not have changes to the rules of the single market imposed on them.
I think that it has to be firstly clarified what exactly he's looking for. I think we need a strong UK within the European Union, but I do think that some of the propositions that he's trying to negotiate about we can discuss. Others I think are totally off the table. If you talk, for example, about 4 freedoms, the freedom of movement, free circulation, these are cornerstones of the European Union that we cannot renegotiate. So I think that we also have to temper his ambitions and to make sure that we end up with a better functioning union, but at the same time preserve the core values of the European Union.
The issue of migrants' benefits is proving particularly contentious, with strong concerns being raised by some Eastern European countries.
There's a certain paradox in this, because we in Poland, some politicians, not myself, were extremely unhappy that many young, well-educated, and education also costs, people from Poland, when we joined the European Union, left looking for higher salaries in other countries, especially in UK. And then all of a sudden, when the crisis started, when the problem started, Poland appeared to be seen as somebody who is using also, who is benefiting from the social system in UK. There is research showing that the contribution of the migrants, if we call them like this, from other EU member states to the Treasury is higher than what they get in terms of benefits.
David Cameron finds himself with a delicate balancing act of having to reach agreement with his European counterparts and also satisfy his Eurosceptic backbenchers.
I personally believe we are, for the moment, unless we get fundamental change, we are better off out of the EU. And I'd like to see Scotland get fishing and farming back, running its own schemes, but part of a wider UK scheme, which is something we could do if we got those powers back from the EU. And by the way, Norway and Iceland, in an EEA agreement with the EU, they do perfectly well outside of the EU. We can have a similar arrangement, and that would benefit Scotland very much.
Any renegotiations here in Brussels will have a direct impact on Scotland, but the UK government has rejected an SNP demand that an EU exit can only take place if all 4 UK nations vote no in the referendum. Nicola Sturgeon has talked of an unstoppable clamour for a second independence referendum if Scotland is taken out of Europe against its will.
The Prime Minister may say he regards Scotland as an equal nation, but nothing about his actions has actually demonstrated that he believes that. So I think that the quad lock is something that should happen. It doesn't look like the government's going to concede it. And therefore they're opening the door to that change in material circumstances, which would certainly happen, as Nicola Sturgeon has outlined, if we arrived at a situation where Scotland, as a European nation, voted in favour of staying in the European Union, and England votes overrode that and pulled us out against our will. That would create an extraordinary constitutional crisis.
These are testing times for the EU. The financial crisis in Greece has thrown up fundamental questions about how the organisation operates.
A European Union with growth, with less poverty, less unemployment, with a better social state and rule of law, and with smaller distances between the rich people and the poor people.
We must recreate the European family in a regional structure, called it may be the United States of Europe.
The European Union as we know it today came about through a number of treaties and agreements following the Second World War. It has divided both the Conservative and Labour parties. The only previous referendum was held in 1975. Fast forward 40 years and David Cameron is again using a public vote to quell unease and keep his party together. Tomorrow will see the start of an intense period of negotiation which will determine how successful he is in shaping the next chapter of our relationship with Europe.
Joining us here at the European Parliament are 5 MEPs. Representing the Scottish Conservatives is Ian Duncan. Representing the SNP is Alan Smith. From Scottish Labour, we have David Martin. From UKIP, we have the party's Scottish leader, David Coburn. And from Angela Merkel's Christian Democrat Party, David McAllister, the son of a Scottish soldier who's been tipped as a future leader of Germany. Thank you all for joining us this evening. David Cameron seeking to get EU reform. It raises the question then, is the EU fit for purpose, Ian?
I think right now we need to recognise reform as the order of the day. It's not just David Cameron talking about it. We're hearing Angela Merkel talking about reform. We recently saw the Danes, again, reform, Finland, reform. This is the moment to try and make sure the European ambition is actually returned to its original purpose and made fit for purpose.
Alan Smith, would you concur, or does change need to come, do you think?
Change is always coming. The EU's always reformed from the Maastricht Treaty, the Nice Treaty, the Single European Act. The only thing that is going to fundamentally change Scotland's relationship with the EU is speaking for ourselves as an independent state, like Ireland, like Denmark, like umpteen other countries. There is an appetite for reform, but the UK is doing it in such a ham-fisted, boneheaded way. We're actually losing friends and not influencing people. The European Commission, literally today, has announced it's setting up a Brexit unit headed by a senior Commission official. The UK is drifting towards the exit door of the EU. That's not influencing nobody.
And David Martin, you've been here a long time. Do you see a need for change?
Well, as Alan says, change is always necessary, but I think the change we need is political, not institutional or structural, and we need to get Europe firstly back to work. The Parliament tonight voted for a £300 billion package to end austerity, and I think that's a very good step in the right direction. Europe should be doing more to take the lead on climate change and environmental policy. And I think collectively, the 28 member states are best placed to tackle tax evasion and tax avoidance. So if we get the politics right, the structure can work for the people of Scotland and the United Kingdom.
David Coburn, you quite clearly don't want Britain to be in the European Union. Yeah. But nevertheless, we are. Does it need radical reform in your view?
Well, I don't think it can be reformed, and that's the problem. That's why we want to leave. And I think that we'd better for Greece if they left. I mean, I think Grexit will be coming. I don't know if they're thinking about having a Grexit unit, but...
you want them to leave the EU as well?
Oh, I think they'd be better off. I think it'd be better for the Greeks to be out of it. I don't think it's in their best interest to remain in the European Union. The euro is a political currency. It's not a proper economic currency. It doesn't work plainly. And most of the countries of Southern Europe are going bust. We want to be able to trade with the entire world. We don't want to be, linked to this sclerotic, dying European beast, which, quite frankly, is not fit for purpose. And we do need to get away from it.
David McAllister, what's the German perspective?
In general, I believe the European Union is a fascinating project. We now have 28 sovereign member states who have come together to pool and share their powers, to pool and share their sovereignty, because we believe that they are stronger together. This is a fascinating idea, and the European Union has brought us peace and liberty and economic success. But of course, the European Union can do better. Of course, the European Union can improve, and that's what we're going to be talking about. In general, I believe the European Union should be bigger on big things and smaller on small things.
The UK Prime Minister, David Cameron, is meeting your Chancellor, Angela Merkel, this evening. Is she likely to be receptive to his calls for reform?
Well, the Prime Minister was in Berlin 2 weeks ago, and the Chancellor said at the press conference, "Wo ein Wille ist, ist auch ein Weg." Where there's a will, we will find a way. So Angela Merkel showed her readiness to help the United Kingdom, to listen to what the British have to say. But now we've just got to wait what concrete proposals the UK government will table, and then we can go into detail. But in general, Germany definitely wants the United Kingdom to stay an active partner of the European Union.
Ian Duncan, what is the strategy of the Prime Minister here? He's not announced the details, so what's he doing?
Two things I think are very clear. He's doing the soft politics right now. He's going literally door to door around the capitals of Europe to talk about options and opportunities. Again, because it's not just about what's good for the UK, it's what other member states can see in the reform approach. As well as that, there are certain aspects which the UK will need to focus upon and push for. But I think he's taken the consensual approach. And then I'm very clear that by the end of the year, on the table will be the package. And that package will be put before the people of the United Kingdom, and then they will determine our relationship with the EU. Not with interference of politicians, but at a ballot box. So that's how it should be.
What aspects need reform, though?
Well, I would say there are a couple of things right away. The first is the Eurozone itself has taken on a dominant role within the European Union. And we've got to make sure that we, outside the European currency, are protected from that domination. The second thing we've got to try and do is look at the concept of ever closer union. Now, the idea seems noble, the idea of peoples working together, but when all policies must be determined toward an integrationist approach, I think there's a risk attached to that. And as well as that, we need to think about some of the issues that are important for us. If we look at financial services, well, the Germans, of course, protect their automobile industry in many different ways. I think we should be looking again at some of the ideas of protecting financial services.
One of the big issues, of course, though, is immigration. Is that something that he'll be...
I would have thought that would be absolutely on the table. Now, free movement is a core policy of the EU, and I support that. Free movement of workers, I think that's the key thing, and really come down to the welfare question inside the United Kingdom. We have a supportive approach for welfare. What we've got to make sure is that people coming to the UK are coming to work, where they contribute enormously to Scotland and to the rest of the UK, but they're here to work. Not to claim benefits, not indeed to be there on the off chance of securing a job. And I think we need to look at reform in that regard.
David Martin, where will he get in these negotiations, do you think?
Well, the first thing to say about the negotiations, you asked Ian what the Prime Minister's strategy was. So this Prime Minister's strategy is to hold his party together. This is not really about Europe. This is about holding the Conservative Party together.
Well, we've done quite well winning an election,
I think at the end of this process, what we're going to have is a set of smoke and mirrors. We're going to have been told we can control our borders. Well, we already can control our borders. We're going to be told we can control our benefits. We already can control our benefits. We're going to be told that our banking system is safe. It already is safe. So actually, I don't actually believe very much constructive will come out of this. And in the interim, what we're doing is a lot of damage with a lot of people because other member states are asking, what's so unique about Britain? Why does Britain need a special deal? And there is nothing unique about Britain. We face exactly the same problems as all the other 27 member states.
No reform required at all.
True. I mean,
no reform required is what you're saying. That's I'm troubled by that.
Okay, David Coburn.
Well, when you see the Channel Tunnel being stormed by immigrants trying to get into the country, obviously the advantages we have in Britain attracts a lot of people. I mean, if I were in their position, I'd be trying to get into Britain too. I don't blame them, but I blame the government for making things too attractive for people to come in, and they're trying anything they can to get into the country. The biggest problem we've got, the mass immigration or mass open-door European movement of people means that we can't control who's coming into the country. We can't defend the...
David Martin, just on that point.
Well, the benefit system, I think, probably does need reformed in some aspects because it probably is too open. And my front bench has said, the Labour Party has said, that you should be here in Britain for 2 years before you're entitled to contributory benefits. And I think that makes sense. But equally, I say that anybody who comes to Britain should be guaranteed by our social security safety net. So nobody should be pushed out of the system. So if we have a reform that makes it less attractive for people coming that don't want to work, but keep it being attractive for people who do want to work.
As long as we're in the European Union, we can't stop them coming.
Let me bring in Alan Smith here. What are the implications for Scotland, Alan?
Well, I find this really ugly. And right there, it's gone to immigration, which has actually nothing to do with the EU. Freedom of movement is not on the table. Full stop. It just isn't.
You can't stop it if you're in the European Union.
But there is freedom of movement within the European Union, and so there should be, and it's been massively good for Scotland, it's been massively good for the UK as well, and you can just get back in your box. The important thing for Scotland is that from our perspective, we are being represented in these talks by a UK apparatus that doesn't get how the EU works. It's having a negotiation about a treaty that hasn't actually been agreed yet. We're seeing an absurd situation where, and I do find this really very personally offensive, that in our referendum in Scotland, EU nationals had a vote, 16, 17-year-olds had a vote, because that was a progressive thing to do. In the British referendum on EU membership, which is the rights of EU nationals living in the UK, the best part of 1.5 million people are going to be told, you're good enough to be living in our communities, helping raise our children, paying your taxes here, but this isn't really a decision for you because you're not really one of us.
If you want to vote, you can become a British citizen.
OK, let me bring in David McAllister at this point. Britain isn't the only nation seeking reform within the EU, is it?
No, there are other countries who also see the room for improvement. I think at the end we will need to find a compromise. And it will be a compromise which on the one hand covers the specific interests of the United Kingdom, but on the other hand, other 27 member states also have their specific interests. As Germany and as a Eurozone member, we will have to accept that the British don't want to introduce the euro, they want to stay out of the Schengen area, and they might want to opt out in other parts of European policy. But on the other hand, the United Kingdom will have to understand that the 19 member states of the Eurozone want to integrate further, and they have to integrate further to keep our joint currency, the euro, stable. So it will be a compromise. That's why it's not only a question about the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe, but all 28 member states have their own interests.
But what about the issue of, as it was touched on there, immigration and benefits for immigrants? Is that an issue in Germany, for example?
Well, it was also an issue in our country, and we had a reform debate after the general elections in 2013, and we improved our national legislation. I would always
But that's the point, David. You improved it inside Germany. You didn't involve the other 27 member states.
Exactly. That's I would always have a close look. What exactly does the United Kingdom want to change? And is a treaty change required or not? Can we do it within the treaties? And how can we improve your national legislation without violating the 4 principles of the single market, including the free movement of workers?
On that point about treaty change, David Martin, will these proposals from the Prime Minister, will they require treaty changes?
Well, if they do, they have no chance of being adopted. So I think we'll end up with something far short of treaty change. The French have made it very clear they don't want a treaty change because it would require a referendum. The Irish would probably require a referendum. Nobody really wants to go down that path. So at the most, there'll be some sort of protocol to the treaties to let David Cameron off the hook. But that protocol will be a restatement, actually, of the rights we already have, in my opinion.
Ian Duncan.
No, I don't get that. I think there will probably need to be, in the short term, a promissory note where the other member states agree that this is an issue that should be addressed concretely, not just by a gentleman's agreement, but actually physically, so that going forward, the notion such as ever closer union is no longer the ratchet that ever further forward moves particular legislation toward integration. Will it happen in the short term? Difficult to say that because there are a number of other pressures, and frankly, right now, holding the Eurozone together may well be one of the top priorities. The situation in Greece will be a greater challenge, and that's why a Brexit unit's all very interesting, but frankly, a Grexit unit right now is absolutely integral to the needs of the Eurozone. So our challenges going forward are, how do we make sure that Britain and the rest of the EU can achieve serious reform that benefits all the peoples of Europe, not just the UK, but we can drive forward in a consensual way to make it better. That's my view, and I think that's what the Prime Minister is going to push for.
This is where I'd agree with much of what you said there.
I'm reassured by that.
But the way to actually surely have that discussion is to not do a dance of the 7 bills by the exit door, which is what the UK is actually doing.
But the Prime Minister has a democratic mandate to do that, does he not?
Don't dispute that.
But he's not,
and I regret that fact.
But what you've got to remember, though, is right now the Prime Minister is going around the soft diplomacy, chancellery by chancellery, ministry by ministry, talking on a one-to-one level to make sure that people understand where the UK is coming from and where the UK wants to go, where allies stand and where common reforms can be achieved. That, to me, is the most simple and sensible definition of diplomacy.
He's rushing on. It's a little fig leaf that he's to cover his enormous embarrassment. The fact that UKIP is on his tail, the fact that his own party is split about Europe. Most of them, given a free vote, they probably want to leave.
I'm not entirely sure UKIP's on it. You've with one MP. I'm not quite sure the influence you intend to exercise.
You
lost your deposit in Falkirk.
We got 4. Yes, well, we had 4 million voters. So that's not a mean thing.
You were telling us you were going to be rushing across Scotland.
Well,
taking
I
this
think a lot of people were so terrified Labour Party would get in on the back of the SNP that's why they.
Okay, well,
strategically.
let's stick with.
Let me just say that what's very important is we want to bring back fishing industry back to Scotland. We want it to be put back to Scotland and to Wales and to England. We want to see powers brought back from Brussels and Frankfurt and brought back to this country. The Scottish National Party are basically a pro-European party, and they didn't vote.
Okay, Alan Smith, you're shaking your head on that, but that might appeal to some Scots, might it not?
It may well.
Fishing, etc.
Well, the question in all of this stuff is what would you replace the status quo with? Now, the idea that you can take fisheries back to national control within an international globalised fishing market is absurd. There's always going to need to be regional control in conjunction with our friends and neighbours. That's where Norway has talks with the EU to decide quotas and that sort of stuff, because, the fish stocks are in trouble and we need to actually deal with that with the friends and neighbours who fish those stocks.
Fish have an annoying habit of not carrying passports.
Precisely so. We just don't know who they are. Some stuff needs to be dealt with on a multilateral
TTIP, for example, the Scottish
I want this to be dealt with on a multilateral basis.
Let me bring in David McAllister on this point. This passing particular power over fishing, for example, to member states, is that a reasonable request?
Well, I think we'll just have to wait and see what exactly the British government wants. I mean, the House of Lords presented a review on the balance of powers between Brussels and London, and they made a few proposals where competences could flow back to the United Kingdom. But if you look at the numbers, it was very few concrete proposals. I mean, we're in a single market, and the single market applies for all 28 member states. And it's good that all these political fields apply for all 28 member states. So I don't believe that there's much room for improvement here. But once again, we're ready to listen to what the British have to say, but I'm not very convinced.
David Martin, the UK has always had an uneasy relationship with Europe, as you know, and you've been an MEP, one of the longest, second longest serving MEP, so you're very aware of this. The Prime Minister is at least trying to address this. Should he not receive some plaudits for that?
No, because I think he is trying to address it purely from a party political point of view. I mean, the point, we have a balance, a compromise here at the European Union level. David's quite right. The single market is an enormous success. It's been great for business, 500 million people. But the compromise there was that we got a social Europe and a Europe that defended consumers, a Europe that defended workers, a Europe that defended environment, to balance the free market policies. And that's a compromise that he wants to try and end. And the one thing he shouldn't come back from these negotiations is any weakening of labour or environmental or other policies, because that would change the dynamics in the UK in terms of support for the European Union.
Well, it's interesting that the GMB union only today has written to various other heads of state saying that if the object of this exercise is to cut back on environmental or worker protection, the GMB will recommend to its members to vote to leave the EU, because they don't actually want to see that. But this is where there is every willingness amongst the member state capitals to help David Cameron out, because nobody wants to see the UK leave in the same way as nobody serious wanted to see Scotland leave either. But it's what that piece of paper is actually going to have on it. We've not seen a list of demands. We've not seen those demands agreed to. And this is where the Prime Minister's made a rod for his own back, because as we see tonight, we're not dealing with people who deal with rationality or facts. The people who are actually going to be hardest going to be on his tail are the people in his backwoods, in his backbenches, and they're not going to be happy with whatever he delivers. So David's entirely right. This is a schism within the Conservative Party that's putting party political interest before the national interest.
No, I'm not buying that for an instance. I think right now, reform is the order of the day. I listened to Nicola Sturgeon come across here and speak about the need for reform. I heard that.
Constructively, yes.
Well, constructive is exactly how the Prime Minister is going to take this forward. But remember, and this is the important thing, we've already begun to achieve things right now, right here. The sheer flow of legislation coming through this Parliament has been significantly reduced. We are doing less and we are doing it better. We are already making progress.
David McAllister. Well, first of all, David McAllister, and then I'll come to you.
You're absolutely right. I think the new Commission has got the message. If you look at what the new Commission under Jean-Claude Juncker is doing, it's less red tape, less legislation, less bureaucracy, and they're focusing on the big issues: energy union, digital single market, industrial policy, investments, and so on. So I think
we've already begun the journey.
The Commission is starting to go the British way.
David Coburn will take a different view.
The biggest issue I've had, and I've been swamped with me, I think we all have, is over TTIP. Now, the Scottish nationalists, there were 2 votes to have that vote immediately in the Parliament, and they knew they were going to lose, and so they tried to put the vote back so that they can give people a few sort of whatever, make everybody happy. But the SNP didn't turn up, didn't vote, and it was 2 votes from doing that. Now, that's the biggest thing to protect Scotland and the health service and all the rest of it, and the SNP didn't turn up.
OK, well very briefly.
That is just absurd. The TTIP vote was postponed by the President.
But you
the TTIP vote is postponed to a later date. OK. And our position on TTIP is absolutely clear.
Let me just go to David McAllister finally. As a German, what do you make of Britain's relationship with Europe, and what would Europe think of a British exit from the EU?
The United Kingdom belongs to Europe. The United Kingdom belongs to the European Union. The United Kingdom has always been a bit different. They joined in the 70s, and after a few years, they had the first referendum and they wanted to stay or not. And I think the difference between the British and the German approach is UK politicians see the European Union mainly as the single market, whereas for us Germans, the European Union is more than the single market. It's a political project, but we have different approaches. But whatever happens, Germany has a vital interest that the United Kingdom stays in the European Union. Why? Because the United Kingdom is such a valuable partner and ally. This country is the driving force for the single market. This country focuses on free trade. The British have always made good proposals to make better legislation, better regulation in Brussels. There are so many reasons for the British to stay. But in the end, the people in the United Kingdom will have to decide. We as Germans can only say, if you ask us, we would like you to stay together.
Basically, EU, no thanks very much.
OK.
And we want to go global. That's where the future is. Asia, Africa, all over the world, South America.
But the only way of doing that is through our trade deals. The fact that the EU is negotiating with Japan, America, China, etc.
Well, we should make our own trade deals.
But we wouldn't have the clout. We wouldn't have the power to do that.
That's naive.
On this point, I'm afraid time's left us. Thank you, gentlemen, all for joining us in Scotland.
Thank you.
Thank you.